So here's our summary of Aeschylus and Aeschylus's key points. To start with, the background of Aeschylus. Remember, he's Athenian, and he must have composed the Persians in 473 BC because he's prepared it for the city Dionysia competition of 472 BC. And this is just 8 years after Salamis. Do you see I put in brackets that Salamis is 480 BC in case any of you have still not remembered that's the date? And remembering also about Aeschylus, he took part in the Battle of Marathon. His own brother was killed there, and therefore almost certainly witnessed Salamis, even if he didn't take part in it. So he's very much an Athenian, writing for an Athenian audience. The nature of the Persians is obviously all about hubris, and it's a play, so it must have dramatic effect to engage his audience. And we need to think about that, and we'll pick up that on a little bit later on. Unusually, for a Greek tragedy, it seems to have been re-performed, which is very, very rare. Usually they're only performed once. His focus is on, broadly speaking, mainly fictionalized Persians, especially the leaders. Now, he might know a little bit about Xerxes, but he's certainly made up stuff about the various leaders and made up stuff about Xerxes, of course. Edith Hall argues that Aeschylus is creating a sense of the barbarian in the play. And this is deliberately done to distinguish the Greeks from the Persians. She portrays the Persians as being effeminate, autocratic, exotic, just otherly and strange. And this helps to emphasize the Greeks' masculine democratic normality, and perhaps the Athenians as well. Apologies for the lack of an apostrophe on the Greeks. But there's our contrast: barbarian versus Greek, effeminate versus masculine, etc. Aeschylus's voice. His aim is to make Athenians think, and that's what's going to get him the win in the competition, because it's all about experiencing catharsis, isn't it? So either he's just writing a conventional tragedy and he's saying, here's a powerful person, he overreached himself, and look what happens to him. And that's what the usual theme of a tragedy is to Greeks and in Greek plays. Other people have suggested that actually it's a celebration of victory, that actually it's all about glorying in the defeat of the Persians. That's why it's set in Persia, and it's a foundation stone, therefore, of Athenian nationalism and national pride. Or possibly the other interpretation is that it's empathizing with the horrors of war and what happens to the Persians having been defeated, and thus is a warning to the Athenians of the dangers of hubris. It's not a conventional tragedy where it talks about an individual's overarching pride. Actually, it's a message to the whole Athenian people about the dangers of a city or a state going too far. So those are your possible interpretations of what Aeschylus is actually trying to make the Athenians think. He, of course, demonstrates his Athenocentric nature in the play. When the chorus talks to Atossa, they say Athens once conquered. He's the master of Hellas. Athens obviously great. They're not called servants to any man. The Battle of Salamis, a Hellene from the Athenian army came and told your son Xerxes this tale. And at Pitaleia, they came armed with bronze shields and spears. So this is all focused on the Athenians. Having said that, Aeschylus is also Greek. It's not just about Athens. So in Atossa's dream, the two women are Persian and Dorian, so the traditional racial classification for a Greek. Forward, you sons of, not Athens, but you sons of Hellas, set your country free. And Darius's prophecy about Plataea, on the Plataean plain, the Dorian lance shall pour, that should be P-O-U-R, shall pour blood in unmeasured sacrifice. So it's clearly Aeschylus is writing both for Greeks and for Athenians. And here's a really critical thing I think it really would pay you to remember. This is a play, and so it's a performance. It gives you space to speculate as to what it must have looked like. We haven't got very many stage directions, and so you can actually think what would have actually happened. And I would suggest you pick up on a number of symbolic elements. The chariot. I talked in the other video about the fact that the chariot arrives, Atossa's on it, it sits on the stage as a symbol of power. She comes back later and she's walking and she's on her own. When Xerxes comes to the stage, he walks onto the stage. The chariot may even be there in the background, symbolic of the loss of power, because of course that's what it does in the dream, where Xerxes tries to harness the Persian and the Dorian women to the chariot, and the Dorian woman throws him off. So the chariot probably symbolizes power, and it sits there on the stage looking like that is what it's doing. Clothes as well. The Persians look very exotic. Their clothes are described as being very full and flowing, and yet at the end Xerxes returns, and remember, how does he come in his clothes? In rags. So again, that's symbolizing the collapse of that. And in the clothing metaphor, well, you may want to bring in the empty quiver as well. That is the only other thing that Xerxes has with him. The empty quiver has no arrows. Xerxes has no military power, and so that talks about his defeat. And you might want to look at the physical behavior of the chorus towards Atossa, Darius, and Xerxes. They prostrate themselves before Atossa. They dare not even look at Darius, but when Xerxes comes, they berate him, they nag him, they hassle him as he goes around, and they don't seem to have any sense of respect for him, or that kind of same sense of awe about him. And don't forget the setting of the play. The audience sit in their tribal groups. What must it have been like to have remembered the battle, sitting there with the people you fought with? They're seated on the benches that maybe were made from the ruined Persian ships themselves, and perhaps even Xerxes' tent is the canopy over the stage. So you're actually there almost within the battle itself, in what's left over. And the backdrop is the ruined Acropolis, the blackened ruins, because they were of course burnt by Xerxes and the Persians. The old Acropolis temples have gone, and as you walk into the theatre, that's what you see. That is the backdrop. And that's what makes this play so daring, doesn't it? That Aeschylus sets it in the Persian court, and it's performed in the ruins of Athens. The danger of the audience taking against him for apparently glorying and giving focus to the Persians is immense, especially when you remember Phrynichus, having written the sack of Miletus, was fined so heavily by the Athenians in the 490s for writing that play. So top quotes, 3 top quotes just to finish. The discussion between Atossa and the chorus about Athens. What master do their ranks obey, she asked. Master? They're not called servants to any man. You can almost sense the crowd cheering. And can they, masterless, resist invasion? At which point you're going to hear the crowd laughing. Yes, Darius' vast and noble army they destroyed. What a ringing endorsement of the power of Athens. The battle cry, which you'll remember comes in 391 to 404, and the messenger is telling the story of how everybody's got ready for the battle, and then he starts up. The Persians knew their error, fear gripped every man. They were no fugitives who sang that terrifying paean, but Hellenes charging with courageous hearts to battle. The loud trumpet flamed along their ranks, and off they go into battle, shouting, "Forward, you sons of Hellas, set your country free, set free your sons, your wives, tombs of your ancestors and temples of your gods, all is now at stake, now fight." Really ringing endorsement of the Greek battle cry, compared to, then from our side in answer rose the manifold clamour of Persian voices. It's a babble from the Persians, they don't have any unity. And the final quote, the judgment of Darius and the results of hubris. He's gone into to telling us all about how Xerxes has allowed himself to be led astray by everybody else. And he says, on the Plataean plain, the Dorian lance shall pour blood in unmeasured sacrifice. Dead heaped upon dead shall bear dumb witness to 3 generations hence. So for 100 years, that man is mortal and must learn to curb his pride, for pride will blossom. Soon its ripening kernel is infatuation, and its bitter harvest tears. And if that isn't a message for all of us, then we've missed the point of Persians.